extraordinary films, and we're lucky enough to be able to show clips from all of them during the course of the interview today. So, if I may, I just want to see a show of hands to get a sense of how much we need to explain. How many of you have seen Pi? Wow, okay. Requiem for a Dream? Fountain? The Wrestler? Okay. So you, just in case you didn't see that yourselves, you all pretty much know.
Preaching to the converted.
Yes. So I think the real thing is to find out how it all happened, and if we can start by talking about the impact of the Sundance Film Festival on you, given it was the festival that catapulted you in many ways into public consciousness. It would be quite useful to know about that experience and your experience here in Edinburgh and what festivals mean to you in general.
It was, what's the question again? Sort of, festivals. They changed a lot. I remember when I first started, I had a short film that I did in undergraduate university, and this was before the internet, or maybe the internet existed but not for filmmakers. And so I can remember going to, there was this one organization in New York that had, that would help you with festivals, and you'd have to go to these big files and take out the folders for each festival and find the application form, and then take your change and photocopy the form, and then go to the post office and mail your videotape off. And so it was a very different world than it was now, and Sundance at the time was already had this reputation for doing all these amazing, premiering all these amazing films and starting all these careers, and so it was really a dream come true when we finally got the film into the festival, and definitely getting into the festival was way beyond any of our expectations. I think like 3-4 weeks before the festival, we almost sold it to totally the wrong buyer for way too little money. And then with Pi, I got to see the world, and I came to Edinburgh, which we called Edinburgh at the end of it, because we were up all night for.
What happened?
Yeah, exactly. And it was a great fest, and the audiences were great. And, so it definitely, at the time, I think there were a lot less festivals, and now it seems like there's a festival in everyone's mother's backyard almost. So I think it's a bit different how films get out there, but definitely at the time it was Sundance was very key.
I mean, you made the film, I think, for $60,000. And when you did that, did you have, who were you making it for? Did you have any expectations of what would happen to it once it had been made? Were you savvy about the marketplace, or did you just want to make that film and see what happened?
There were a few examples of filmmakers who had come before. When I was in film school, Robert Rodriguez's $7,000 El Mariachi was making headlines, and before that there was Slackers by Linklater and Kevin Smith's Clerks were kind of those were the big successes. And of course before that there was there was Spike Lee and Jarmusch that had sort of taken this New York aesthetic and had these films released worldwide. So there were models, and so there was this sense of, okay, we got to do this film, we got to get into Sundance. But Sundance has different sections for American films, and there's a section which is the main competition, which is kind of the dream to be in, because that's the kind of where all the press attention goes. But we were actually gunning for a slot in the midnight films, because my dream was always just to make sort of a midnight cult film, because those were the films that inspired me when I was in high school. They were, Stop Making Sense and Clockwork Orange, and those were the movies I wanted that I thought were really cool. And I think Pi, in fact, one of my biggest, kind of the best night I had was opening night of Pi in New York City at a place called the Angelica Film Center, which was a new kind of place. We had a midnight screening. And afterwards, David Blaine was there, and everybody knows David Blaine, the guy that was in the box. And I saw him, and I didn't know him, but I knew who he was, and I went up to him and I said, David, what do you think of my movie? And he said, I slept through it. So I hated David Blaine for years, so I'm a lot like the rich people. But then years later, he apologized, so he made up for it. But so there was a bit of a plan. But then we got into competition. We didn't really know. I mean, really, we were very lucky because, our first screening at Sundance with the film was a total disaster. Sundance used to do screenings at a place called the Sundance Resort, which is about 45 minutes away from Park City, where all the screenings take place. So the only people who had, the finances or the will to actually see the film were all distributors. And the film broke 3 or 4 times in the first reel. It kept the projector went down, and in some ways, being at the resort, that was the only benefit because no one left because they were 45 minutes away. So that helped us. But still, so I went up there and I kind of tried to entertain the masses. But afterwards, it finally did show. And afterwards, during the Q&A, there was a single question was asked. And normally at these things, it's very filmmaker friendly because they were all distributors. And the question was actually from a dear friend, so it was actually, it was a setup. So it was a disaster. We all had, all the filmmakers, the whole team, we had a meal at the resort, and it was just like, it was like going to a wake, pretty much. Not a Scottish wake, but and I remember going to the restroom afterwards, and there was Harvey Weinstein in the bathroom next to me, and I was like, oh, this is my moment. Go ask Harvey to make sure he sees my film. And I got up to him in the sink, and he was having a hard time because it was one of those remote control things in the sink, and he couldn't figure out how to do it. And he looked at me and he said, how does this fucking thing work? And I was like, oh, well, you just put your hands a little lower. And he said, and that was it. So I didn't actually. But in that first screening was a guy who was starting this new company called Artisan, which they actually didn't even have the name yet. And his name was Bill Block, and he had been an agent for a while. And he saw the film and he got it, and came up to me afterwards and said, "How would you like to? We're made." And I think it was it was brilliant how he kind of, because his company meant nothing, so they weren't even on our radar, even though no one was interested in our film. So he would have been on my radar, but he said, "I'm producing a film for Roman Polanski, and the script needs a rewrite. Would you be interested?" Which is like offering crack to a withdrawing junkie, And I was like, so immediately I remembered him, and that film ended up being Ninth Gate,
Wow.
but which I didn't rewrite. But anyway, his company eventually bought it a few days later.
Yeah, wow. And I think maybe we should just remind ourselves of Pi, and perhaps to ask you how you would have sold it had you had to sell it before you'd made it, because the models that you talked about in terms of urgency to make a low-budget movie were all perhaps easier to quantify and pitch and sell than Pi. And the film sold itself in a sense, it spoke for itself, and people watched the complete product. But
yeah, I remember at the core of it, we always were pitching a thriller. And if you think Pi was, there was, I always talked about this engine in the center of it, which was a thriller. And my hopes and my theory was that if you have like a strong engine, then you can dress it up as much as you want. But I think what happened is I had gone to Sundance a couple of years earlier with a friend, actually the same friend who asked the question at that screening. He had a film at the festival, and it was the year that Welcome to the Dollhouse was there, and They Might Be Giants, Muhammad Ali film. And I remember watching Welcome to the Dollhouse and realizing that no matter what the film is, if it's a personal story and you do your job, you make a good film, there's an audience for it. That's kind of what that film showed me. And so it kind of inspired me to go out and do something that I thought was interesting and cool.